They said she was cursed for bearing only daughters. Her husband beat her for it. Her in-laws starved her for it. But when the mysterious cowboy with the scarred hands saw her youngest daughter hiding bruises under long sleeves, he made a promise that would change everything. What he did next shocked the entire town of Cedar Falls and saved 3 little girls from a fate worse than death. But first, he had to prove that sometimes the most broken people make the strongest families. Cedar Falls, Wyoming, spring of 1874. The sun was a pale smear in a gray sky, but inside the Whitmore farmhouse, the only light came from the misery in Martha Whitmore's eyes. She moved like a phantom through her own kitchen, her body a road map of exhaustion and fear. The bruises on her wrists were dark and ugly, twisted bracelets of purple and black. She ladled thick stew into 3 bowls, the smell of it a cruel joke in a house starved of kindness. The bowls weren't for her. They were never for her, or for her children. They were for the men who ruled this place with iron fists. At the head of the table sat Thomas Whitmore, a man whose shoulders were stooped from the weight of his own disappointment. He shoveled food into his mouth, his spoon held like a weapon. Beside him, his parents, Mother and Father Whitmore, watched with faces pinched into masks of permanent disapproval. "More bread," Thomas grunted. Martha sliced a piece from the loaf, her hands trembling. She placed it by his bowl and retreated, her head bowed, her presence erased. In the corner, on the cold floorboards, 3 little girls huddled together. Elsa, the oldest at 8, wrapped her arms around her sisters. 6-year-old Rose pressed into her side, while 4-year-old Ava curled up like a frightened animal. Their clothes were rags. Their faces were hollowed out by a hunger that never left. Elsa's stomach rumbled, a sound that cut through the silence like a whip crack. Thomas's head snapped up. "Shut that noise up!" he barked, his eyes blazing. "I can't eat with that racket." Elsa's face burned with shame. She clamped a hand over her stomach, trying to disappear. Mother Whitmore slammed her spoon down. Her cold eyes swept over the girls. 3 daughters, she hissed, the words dripping with venom. 3 daughters and not 1 son. What kind of woman are you, Martha? The old accusation landed like a physical blow. Martha sagged. 8 years she had heard it. 8 years of being called a failure. A curse. "A real woman gives her husband sons," Father Whitmore added, wiping his beard. "What good are daughters? Just useless mouths to feed." As if on cue, little Ava shifted, and an empty tin cup beside her rattled to the floor. Thomas's chair scraped back as he stood, his face a storm of rage. "Can't even sit still," he snarled, moving toward the 4-year-old. Elsa leaped up, placing her small body between her father and her baby sister. "It was an accident, Papa." His hand rose, ready to strike. Martha threw herself forward. "Please, Thomas," she begged, her voice breaking. "She's just a baby." He froze, his arm trembling in midair. Then he lowered it, but his eyes promised a later punishment. "Get them out of my sight," he growled, "and keep them quiet." Martha herded her children into the dark pantry where they slept on the floor. As the door closed, Mother Whitmore's voice followed them like a curse. "Mark my words, Thomas. This family is doomed." But what they didn't know was that someone was watching. Outside the window, half hidden in the morning shadows, a tall man in a worn cowboy hat stood perfectly still. His weathered hands were clenched into tight fists. His name was Ethan Sullivan, and he'd been looking for work. But what he'd just seen through that grimy windowpane changed everything. He saw the fear on the woman's face. He saw the hunger in the children's eyes. But it was the moment little Ava's sleeve rode up, revealing a constellation of old and new bruises on her tiny arm that made his jaw clench so hard it ached. Ethan had seen that look before. He knew that terror. He remembered it from his own childhood, from his own father's heavy hands. But he wasn't a helpless boy anymore. This time, he could do something. He adjusted his hat and walked to the front door, his boots thudding on the porch like a drumbeat of judgment. When Thomas Whitmore answered, Ethan looked him straight in the eye. "Heard you might need a ranch hand," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm a hard worker." Thomas sized him up, his greedy eyes noting Ethan's strong build. "Maybe," he grunted. "What's your name?" "Ethan Sullivan," he replied, "and I'd like to start right away." As Thomas led him away to talk wages, Ethan's gaze drifted back to the kitchen. 3 little girls were being taught they were worthless. But Ethan Sullivan had other plans. What he was about to do would start with a promise, and it would end with the whole town of Cedar Falls learning that the most broken people can forge the strongest families. But first, he had to get inside. For 3 days, Ethan worked, and he watched. He saw Martha slip her own meager breakfast to little Ava when Thomas wasn't looking. He saw Elsa whispering reading lessons to her sisters behind the woodshed, lessons she'd pieced together from listening at the schoolhouse window. He saw Rose, fierce and protective, stand up to a mean old rooster that terrorized everyone else. But it was the secret he uncovered on the 4th morning that set his blood on fire. The sun hadn't yet risen when he heard hushed voices from the barn. Peering through a crack in the boards, he saw Elsa on the dirt floor, using a piece of charcoal to draw letters. Rose and Ava were crouched beside her, their faces alight with concentration. B, C, Elsa whispered, guiding Ava's tiny finger. "Mama says daughters should know letters, but Papa says it's wasteful, so we practice in secret." Ethan's chest tightened. A little girl, terrified of being caught learning. The sheer injustice of it burned in his throat. This wasn't just cruelty. This was the deliberate crushing of a soul. That night, he went to the saloon. He wasn't there to drink. He was there to listen. The bartender told him everything. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just in debt. He was drowning in it. Gambling losses, a huge loan from the bank, tabs at every store in town. But there was one debt that was different. A large sum owed to a man named Silas Kane. The name hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Silas Kane. A name from his own dark past. A name he thought he'd left behind forever. Suddenly, this wasn't just a troubled family. This was something far more dangerous. Then the bartender dropped the final piece. "Heard Thomas is sending the girls away," he muttered, wiping down the bar. "Orphanage in Denver. Wagons coming for them next week." Ethan's blood ran cold. Separated, sent to work as servants, their bright minds extinguished forever. He stared out into the night, the stars cold and distant. He had run from his past for years. He had tried to be a better man than the one he was raised by, than the one he had become. He'd seen what happened when good people stood by and did nothing. He would not let it happen again. The next morning, he found Martha in the barn, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly. She flinched, fear in her eyes. "Mr. Sullivan." "I need to talk to you about your daughters." Her hands stilled. "If they've been a bother." "They haven't," he said, his voice urgent. He knelt in the straw beside her. "I know about the orphanage, ma'am. I know what Thomas is planning." Her face went bone white. "There's nothing to be done." "There is," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. "I have a proposition for you. I'll buy this land. I'll pay off every one of Thomas's debts. And I'll marry you if you'll have me. I'll adopt the girls, legally. No one will ever take them from you again." Martha stared at him, her mind unable to process the words. "Why? Why would you do this?" "I'm cursed. I have only daughters. I'm worthless." "You listen to me." Ethan's voice was firm, but kind. "You are not cursed, and your daughters are not burdens. They are gifts this family has been too blind to see." He reached out, his scarred hands gently covering hers. "I've watched Elsa teach her sisters to read in secret. I've seen Rose face down animals twice her size. And Ava. That little girl has a mind like a steel trap. These aren't flaws, Martha. They're strengths." "But they're girls," she whispered, the words a distillation of her entire life's pain. "Yes," Ethan said. "And I'll raise them to be proud of it. I'll make sure they know that reading isn't wasteful, that being strong-willed isn't a sin, and that being clever is something to celebrate." Tears streamed down her face. She searched his eyes, looking for the lie, the trick she'd been taught all men possessed. She saw only a fierce, steady determination, and something else, something she hadn't seen in a very long time. Hope. "You'd really do this?" she breathed. "For us?" "Ma'am," Ethan said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I would consider it an honor." Thomas Whitmore laughed when Ethan made the offer. He laughed right up until he heard the numbers. "You're offering to pay all of it?" Thomas's bloodshot eyes went wide with greed. "Even the debt to Kane?" "Every last cent," Ethan confirmed, "plus $500 for a clean slate. You sign over the land, you agree to the divorce and my marriage to Martha, and you relinquish all parental rights. You walk away and never come back." Thomas's face was a mess of suspicion and avarice. "Why would you want this worthless land? And my wife? My girls?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "They deserve better than you." The lure of a fresh start, free from the crushing weight of his failures, was too much for Thomas to resist. He hesitated for only a moment. By sundown, the papers were drawn up. The land, the marriage, and 3 little girls were signed over to Ethan Sullivan. The ceremony at the Cedar Falls courthouse was a quiet, solemn affair. Martha stood beside Ethan, her spine straight for the first time in years. The girls watched, their eyes wide with a fragile, unbelievable hope. Judge Patterson pronounced them husband and wife. But Ethan didn't turn to kiss his new bride. He turned and knelt before the 3 daughters who were now legally and forever his. "Elsa," he said, taking her small hands in his, "you are going to read every book in this territory. I promise." Her breath caught. "Really?" "Rose," he said, turning to the defiant 6-year-old, "you are going to learn to ride and train any horse you want. No one will ever tell you it's not a woman's place again." She nodded, her braids bouncing, a grin spreading across her face. Finally, he looked at little Ava, the 4-year-old with the mind of a genius, who had been taught to hide her brilliance like a crime. "Ava," he said gently, "you are going to grow up knowing your mind is a gift, not a curse. You understand me?" Her lower lip trembled. You won't send us away?" "Never." Ethan's voice was as solid as the mountains. "You're my daughters now, and that's forever." For the first time in their lives, they heard a man speak to them with respect, with love. The change had begun. But as they left the courthouse, Ethan saw a man watching them from across the street. A man with a cruel face and a familiar sneer. It wasn't Silas Kane. It was one of his men. The message was clear. This wasn't over. It had just begun. Ethan's ranch house was small, just 4 rooms, but to Martha and the girls, it was a palace. "These are your beds," Ethan announced, leading them to a room with 3 small cots, each with a real mattress and a warm quilt. The girls stood frozen in the doorway. "Are you sure it's allowed?" Ava whispered. In their old life, they'd slept on rags on the cold pantry floor. This was a luxury they couldn't comprehend. "It's not just allowed," Ethan said. "It's required. My daughters sleep in proper beds." Later, as the girls explored their new room with a hushed reverence, Ethan built a fire in the yard. Martha watched, confused, as he carried out the bundle of filthy rags that had been their only bedding. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making sure you never go back," he said, and tossed the rags onto the fire. They watched as their old life turned to ash and smoke. Rose tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Mr. Ethan, are we really allowed to talk at the dinner table?" He crouched to her level. "Rose, in this house, you are encouraged to talk. I want to hear your thoughts. All of you." That first dinner was a quiet miracle. Simple stew and fresh bread, but it was a feast. More importantly, they sat at the table, as family. "Tell me about yourselves," Ethan said. "What do you dream about?" Uncertain glances were exchanged. No one had ever asked them that. Elsa spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "I like letters. I want to learn about faraway places." "Then you will," Ethan promised. Slowly, like flowers turning to the sun, the girls began to open up. Martha watched, her heart aching, as the personalities fear had suppressed for so long began to emerge. but a shadow hung over them. The man from town. Ethan knew he couldn't protect them forever by hiding. He had to arm them, not with guns, but with knowledge, with confidence. The real transformation began the next day. Real education starts today, Ethan told Elsa, pulling out a stack of books he'd kept from his own youth. Advanced readers, mathematics, astronomy. Elsa's hands trembled as she touched the leather bindings. He took Rose to the corral. "This is Copper," he said, introducing her to a gentle mare. "She's yours to care for." The girl who was forbidden to go near livestock was now in charge of one. And then there was Ava. Ethan was trying to calculate winter feed costs. Before he could even finish the question, Ava piped up from the corner. "You have 12 horses. At 20 pounds of hay a day, that's 240 pounds. For 120 winter days, you'll need 28,800 pounds, or 14.4 tons. Ethan stared at the 4-year-old. "You did that in your head?" She looked down, her face clouded with worry. "Was I not supposed to? Thomas always got angry when I knew numbers." "Ava," Ethan said, kneeling in front of her, "in this house, being smart is something to be proud of. Never hide it." The girls blossomed, but the town of Cedar Falls watched. They saw Ethan Sullivan take on a ruined farm and a broken family. They whispered. They waited for him to fail. And Silas Kane's man was still in town, watching, waiting. Ethan knew a storm was coming. He just didn't know it would arrive in the form of a drought. 6 months after the wedding, the sky turned to brass, and the rains stopped. Creek beds cracked. The earth turned to dust. The few remaining water sources were controlled by the established ranchers, the ones who had run Cedar Falls for generations. When the Cattlemen's Association called an emergency meeting, Ethan wasn't invited. "You're an outsider, Sullivan," Sam Morrison, the association president, told him. "This is about water rights that go back 50 years. You wouldn't understand. It was a wall of suspicion and hostility. But Ethan had a secret weapon." The next morning, the ranchers stared in disbelief as Ethan rode up to the meeting with 8-year-old Elsa sitting straight-backed behind him. "Gentlemen," Ethan announced, lifting her down. "Meet my daughter, Elsa. She's my representative." Morrison sputtered. "This is a business meeting, not a schoolhouse." "Then you'd better listen," Ethan replied. "Because my daughter is about to save your ranches." Elsa stepped forward, clutching a map she had spent weeks drawing. Her voice, though young, was clear and confident. "Gentlemen," she began, "you're fighting over 3 dying creeks because you've ignored 17 smaller water sources." The room fell silent. She unrolled her map. It was a masterpiece of detail, showing every spring, every seasonal runoff, every underground aquifer she'd identified from old survey maps and weeks of walking the territory with Ethan. "Mr. Morrison," she said, pointing, "there's an artesian well here that could supply your ranch and the Tucker place. Mr. Fletcher, your cattle are dying at Devil's Creek, but there's a year-round spring 2 miles northeast of your property line that you've never found." One by one, she laid out a brilliant, logical plan for resource sharing that would save every ranch in the valley. The seasoned cattlemen were speechless. Finally, old Tom Fletcher cleared his throat. "Little miss, how in the world did you know about that spring on my land?" Elsa smiled. "Because I pay attention, Mr. Fletcher. And because my father taught me that being smart isn't something to hide." Morrison looked from Elsa to Ethan, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. This could actually work. But as the ranchers gathered around the map, a man named Henderson, one of Morrison's cronies, sneered. "It's a trick. Sullivan is trying to get his hands on all our water rights." The suspicion in the room returned, thicker than before. The ranchers backed away from the table. Morrison's face hardened. "He's right. How do we know these sources even exist? This could be a land grab." Elsa's face fell. She had offered them a lifeline, and they had thrown it back in her face. Just then, the doors to the meeting hall burst open. A young boy ran in, breathless. "Mr. Fletcher, it's your cattle. They've broken through the fence down by Devil's Creek. They're stampeding into the dry lands. Fletcher's face went pale. In their weakened state, a stampede into a waterless wasteland was a death sentence for his entire herd. Without a second's hesitation, Ethan turned. "Rose," he called out to his daughter, who had been waiting outside. "Get Midnight." The ranchers scoffed. A 9-year-old girl and a horse were going to stop a stampede? But Rose wasn't just any girl, and Midnight wasn't just any horse. He was the wild Mustang, the unbreakable devil that had hospitalized 2 cowboys before Rose, with patience and kindness, had earned his trust. She rode Midnight like she was born in the saddle, her small frame a perfect extension of the powerful animal beneath her. She didn't ride at the herd head-on. She rode alongside them, her voice calling out, calm and steady. Midnight moved with an intelligence that was almost human, nudging the lead steer, turning him slowly, gently, away from the dry lands and back toward the creek. It was a ballet of courage and trust. The ranchers watched, mesmerized, as the 9-year-old girl did what a dozen of their best cowboys couldn't. She turned the herd. She saved them. When Rose rode back, her face smudged with dust but her eyes shining, the mood in the room had changed. Old Man Fletcher walked up to her, his hat in his hands. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice thick. I am in your debt." He turned to the other ranchers. "This family, they just saved my livelihood. I say we listen to the other girl." The tide had turned, but the victory felt fragile. As they rode home, Ethan saw the man again, Kane's man. And this time, he wasn't just watching. He was talking to Sam Morrison. A chill went down Ethan's spine. This wasn't a coincidence. The drought, the hostility, Morrison. It was all connected, and his family was standing right in the middle of it. After the stampede, the ranchers grudgingly agreed to Elsa's plan. They started digging where she told them to, their skepticism warring with their desperation. When the first well struck fresh, clean water, a cheer went up that could be heard for miles. Elsa's plan worked. She had saved them. But the victory brought new problems. The girls were no longer invisible. Elsa's intelligence, Rose's gift with animals. People were talking. And then there was Ava. Old Pete Henderson at the general store had been struggling with his account books for months. 6-year-old Ava, waiting for Martha to finish her shopping, overheard his frustrated muttering. "Mr. Henderson," she said politely, "your accounts don't balance because you recorded Mrs. Morrison's flour purchase as 43 cents, but you charged her 34. You also have 17 other errors in the last 2 pages." Pete stared at her, dumbfounded. He checked the numbers. The little girl was right, about everything. Within 2 hours, Ava had corrected months of faulty accounting. Word of the little girl who could see numbers like other people saw words spread like wildfire. Soon, shopkeepers and ranchers were quietly consulting the 6-year-old Sullivan girl. The family was becoming a local legend. But fame was a double-edged sword. It made them a bigger target. Ethan knew Morrison was watching them. He could feel it. And Kane's man was still in town. One night, Ethan followed him. He watched from the shadows as the man met with Morrison behind the saloon. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw an envelope pass from Morrison to the hired gun. They weren't just talking. They were allies. Ethan returned to the ranch, his mind racing. Morrison had tried to use the drought to break him. When that failed, what would he do next? He was using a man connected to Silas Kane. This was about more than just a ranch. It was about the secret Ethan had been running from his whole life. The girls, meanwhile, were making their own discoveries. Rose, riding Midnight through the hills, found a hidden canyon. In it was an old, collapsed mine entrance, and near the entrance, she found a pocket watch half buried in the dirt. It was engraved with the initials T.W. Elsa. Studying the old survey maps again, found a strange anomaly. A section of their land was marked with a geological symbol she didn't recognize. After cross-referencing it in an old mining textbook, her eyes went wide. The symbol meant coal, a massive untapped vein of it. Ava, helping the banker sort out his tangled ledgers as a favor, uncovered a series of shell corporations and hidden land purchases. All of them traced back to one man, Sam Morrison. He had been quietly buying up mineral rights all over the territory, surrounding the Whitmore now Sullivan ranch like a wolf circling its prey. That night, they put the pieces together. Thomas hadn't just been in debt. Morrison had been orchestrating it, using Kane as his enforcer, planning to foreclose and take the land for the coal he knew was there. Ethan's arrival had ruined everything. The drought, the hostility from the association. It had all been a ploy to drive him out. The pocket watch proved Thomas had known about the mine, but he must not have known how to get to it. They were sitting on a fortune, and their enemies were closing in. The very next day, a telegram arrived. It contained only 5 words. "I know who you are." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Ethan knew Silas Kane was coming. 2 years had passed. 2 years of fragile peace. The Sullivan family had not just survived, they had thrived. Elsa, now 10, was tutoring other children. Rose, 9, was training horses for ranchers all over the territory. Ava, 6, was the unofficial financial advisor for half the businesses in Cedar Falls. But Ethan lived every day with the knowledge that it could all be taken away. He had trained the girls, not just in reading and writing, but in survival. How to track, how to read the land, how to be smarter and tougher than anyone expected them to be. Then, one rainy Thursday, the nightmare they had been dreading arrived on their doorstep. Thomas Whitmore stumbled onto the porch, drunk, filthy, and desperate. The money Ethan had given him was long gone, gambled, and cheated away. "I want my family back," he slurred. "You stole them, Sullivan." Ethan stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. "You sold them, Thomas. We signed papers." "I was drunk. I wasn't thinking straight." Thomas's voice rose to a screech. "Those are my blood daughters, my property. No court will side with a stranger over their real father." Through the window, Ethan could see Martha and the girls, their faces pale with the old fear. A real father. Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. Doesn't beat his children for being born. He doesn't sell them to an orphanage. "I was teaching them discipline," Thomas spat. "You've ruined them, filling their heads with nonsense, making them think they're as good as boys." "They're better than boys," Ethan said. "They're better than you or me." "We'll see about that," Thomas sneered, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. "Court order, custody hearing, tomorrow at 10. Judge Patterson will see that children belong with their natural father." As Thomas staggered away, another figure stepped out of the rain-soaked shadows. He was a tall man with a face so badly scarred it looked like a melted candle. One eye was milky white. Silas Kane had arrived. "Evening, Butcher," Kane rasped, his voice like gravel grinding on bone. "It's been a long time." Ethan's blood ran cold. The nickname was from their past, from a bank robbery gone wrong, a fire. A fire Ethan had started to create a diversion, a fire that had trapped a family inside. Ethan had chosen to save the family, leaving Kane for dead. He had been running from that night ever since. "Looks like my old friend Thomas here has a legal claim," Kane smiled, a horrifying twisting of his scarred lips. "And I'm here to make sure he gets what's his. You see, he owes me, and since he's broke, his property is now my property." He gestured to the house, where the girls were watching from the window. "The hearing tomorrow is just a formality," Kane said. "Morrison has the judge in his pocket. By noon tomorrow the girls will be mine. And then you and I can have a proper talk about that coal under your feet." The trap had been sprung. It wasn't just a custody battle. It was a hostile takeover, with his daughters as the prize. The Cedar Falls courthouse was packed. It seemed the entire territory had come to watch the final act of the Sullivan family's drama. Thomas sat at one table, cleaned up and playing the part of the wronged father. Beside him, Silas Kane watched with his dead eye, a predator enjoying the show. At the other table, Ethan sat with Martha. Behind them, Elsa, Rose, and Ava sat straight and tall, their faces pale, but their eyes filled with a fire that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Judge Patterson, a man known to be swayed by the town's powerful ranchers, called the court to order. Thomas stood and gave a practiced speech about a father's love, about making a mistake, about wanting to restore his family to its proper order. He painted Ethan as a Svengali, a man who had confused his daughters with unnatural ideas about education and independence. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the courtroom. Traditional values ran deep. Then, Judge Patterson did something no one expected. "Before I rule," he announced, "I'd like to hear from the children." Elsa walked to the bench, her 10-year-old frame radiating a confidence that silenced the room. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing with clarity. "Before Papa Ethan, I was taught that reading was a waste for a girl. Now, I can survey land and calculate water rights. Thomas Whitmore told me I was a burden. Papa Ethan taught me my mind could set me free." Rose was next. "Thomas Whitmore would have sent me away for being too strong-willed. Papa Ethan taught me to train horses that grown men were afraid of. He taught me that my strength was a gift." Finally, little Ava, just 6 years old, approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice small but steady, "Thomas Whitmore tried to beat the intelligence out of me. Ethan Sullivan calls me brilliant. One man tried to break me, the other taught me how to soar." The courtroom was utterly silent. 3 young girls had just dismantled Thomas's case with the simple, devastating power of the truth. But then, Silas Kane stood up. "This is all very touching, Your Honor, but it changes nothing. The law is clear. A father's rights are absolute." He turned to Ethan. "Isn't that right?" "Butcher." The word hung in the air. Judge Patterson looked at Ethan, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Sullivan, is there something you'd like to tell the court?" This was it, the moment of truth. Ethan looked at his family, at the 3 girls who had trusted him. He could not build their future on a foundation of lies. "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan said, standing. "My name isn't Ethan Sullivan." A gasp went through the courtroom. "My real name is Ethan Cole. 15 years ago, I was part of a gang led by that man, Silas Kane. We robbed a bank in Texas. There was a fire. I left him for dead to save a family trapped upstairs. I've been running ever since. I came here to start a new life. But my past has caught up to me." Kane was laughing. "You see? He's a liar, a criminal, a killer. Are you really going to give 3 innocent girls to this man?" The case was collapsing. The townspeople were staring at Ethan with shock and betrayal. All the good he had done was being erased by the sins of his past. Judge Patterson looked grim. "Given this testimony, I have no choice." But before he could finish, Martha stood up. "No," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You have a choice. You can listen to the law, or you can listen to the truth. The truth is that Ethan Cole, or Ethan Sullivan, or whatever he calls himself, is a better father than Thomas Whitmore could ever be. He saved us. He saved my daughters from a life of misery and abuse." Then Elsa stepped forward again. "And he's not the only one with a secret. Your Honor, for the past 2 years, Sam Morrison, Silas Kane, and Thomas Whitmore have been conspiring to steal our land for the coal that's under it." She produced the maps. Ava produced the ledgers showing Morrison's shady dealings. Rose produced the pocket watch, proving Thomas had been at the secret mine. They laid out the entire conspiracy, piece by damning piece. The courtroom erupted. The ranchers who Elsa had saved from the drought began shouting their support for the Sullivans. The shopkeepers Ava had helped yelled at Morrison. Sam Morrison's face was ashen. Kane's was a mask of fury. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel. "Order! Order!" He looked at the evidence. He looked at the 3 fierce, brilliant girls. And he looked at Ethan, the confessed outlaw who had built this incredible family. "In all my years on the bench," he said slowly, "I have never seen anything like this. The law is a complicated thing. But justice is sometimes very simple." He looked directly at Thomas. "Mr. Whitmore, you are a disgrace." He looked at Kane and Morrison. "And you 2 are criminals. Sheriff, take these men into custody." As deputies dragged them away, the judge turned to Ethan. "As for you, Ethan Cole, you have a past to answer for. But you have also done more good for this community than any man I know. You have shown us what a real father is, what a real family is." He brought his gavel down with a resounding crack. "Custody of the children remains with Ethan and Martha Sullivan. now and forever. A roar of approval shook the courthouse. The final test was over. They had won. 5 years later, a 15-year-old Elsa Sullivan stood before a classroom, the youngest certified teacher in the Wyoming Territory. She was explaining advanced mathematics to a rapt audience of boys and girls, her voice filled with the passion Ethan had nurtured. A delegation from the Territorial School Board was there to offer her a position at the new Teachers College in Cheyenne. "I'd like to train other women to be teachers, Papa," she told Ethan later, "so more girls can have the chances you gave me." At the Cedar Falls Stock Show, 13-year-old Rose Sullivan was revolutionizing the horse trade. Her innovative, gentle training methods had made her famous. The Colorado Cattlemen's Association, an organization of grizzled old ranchers, had just voted her in as their first female member. "On one condition," Rose told them, her chin held high. "That my membership includes the right to train other women in these methods." 11-year-old Ava Sullivan, meanwhile, received a letter from Harvard University. Her correspondence with a law professor about women's property rights had so impressed them, they were inviting her to enter their pre-law program in 3 years, which would make her the youngest student they had ever accepted. "Papa," she said, her eyes shining, "I'm going to be Wyoming's first female lawyer." That evening, Ethan and Martha sat on their porch. Their small house was now a center of the community, a place where people came for help, for tutoring, for advice. The woman who had been called cursed now led the Women's Education Committee. The outlaw who had been running from his past was now a respected town elder. They watched as their 3 extraordinary daughters taught a group of neighborhood girls in the yard. "You kept your promise," Martha said softly, taking his scarred hand. "You raised them proud." "They raised themselves proud," Ethan said. "I just gave them permission to shine." Across the yard, Elsa encouraged a student struggling with an equation. Rose patiently showed a timid girl how to approach a horse. Ava explained basic accounting to a merchant's daughter. The frightened, broken children were gone, replaced by strong, brilliant young women who were changing their world. One lesson, one horse, one legal brief at a time. The curse had become a blessing, a legacy that would echo for generations. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from believing in someone when the whole world says they're worthless. Ethan Sullivan didn't just save 3 little girls. He proved that daughters, when given love and opportunity, can change the world. If this story moved you, if you believe every child deserves a chance to shine, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of courage and the power of believing in someone. Share this story and help spread the message that every daughter deserves to be raised proud.